All right, today we're cracking open one of the most detailed blueprints in history. And I'm not talking about a skyscraper. This is something else entirely. It's not just about wood and gold. It's a plan for a physical building meant to house, well, a spiritual presence. So let's get into how it was all supposed to come together.
And it all kicks off with this one line. Seriously, this is it. It's not a request, not a suggestion. It's the mission statement for the whole shebang. The entire point of this massive project is spelled out right here. Build a physical place so a divine presence can dwell among the people. This one verse is the foundation for everything we're about to talk about.
Okay, so first up, let's talk about where this whole idea came from. You got to understand, this wasn't some community project that people just decided to do. Nope, the instruction comes from the top down. It's a direct command to build a very specific thing for a very specific reason.
But that brings up a huge question, right? How do you pay for something this big? Especially when you're talking about a nation of people who were just recently slaves, now wandering in a desert. Well, the answer is pretty fascinating. It's all about how the community chips in. And it turns out the why you give is just as important as the what you give.
And that brings us to this key word, terumah. Now, you might see it translated as just a gift or an offering. But the legendary commentator Rashi, we're talking 11th century here, he digs deeper. He explains it's not just a gift, it's about setting something apart. It's a contribution that comes from the heart, from your own goodwill. So this isn't a tax, It's something you want to give.
So that sounds pretty straightforward, doesn't it? Just, pass the hat, let people give what they want, and build the thing. But is it really that simple? Was this whole project funded by just one big donation drive?
Well, not exactly. When the classic commentators really looked at the text, they realized something was a bit more complex. The answer wasn't one, it was three.
And this is where Rashi's analysis is just so cool. He breaks it down and says that one word, terumah, is actually talking about three different collections happening at the same time. The first, a mandatory half shekel from every single person, no exceptions. That money was for the silver sockets, the very foundation of the structure. Then, there was a second half shekel collection, this one for buying the daily communal sacrifices. And then you have the third one. That's the terumah of the heart, the totally voluntary gifts, the gold, the copper, all the good stuff. It's this amazing system that combines everyone's duty with everyone's personal inspiration. Just brilliant.
All right, so the fundraising is happening, but what are they actually collecting? The shopping list is super specific, and honestly, it includes some stuff that, well, it makes you scratch your head. How did a bunch of people in the middle of the Sinai Desert get their hands on this?
I mean, look at this list. We're talking gold, silver, copper. We've got these beautifully dyed yarns, blue, purple, crimson. Then there are animal skins, some of them pretty exotic, acacia wood, special oils, spices, and even gemstones. So yeah, the big question is, where did they get all this stuff?
Okay, let's just pick one thing from that list. Acacia wood. This is the main wood used for building almost everything, including the most sacred object in the whole place. But, acacia trees aren't exactly growing everywhere in the desert, so how did they have it on hand?
And this is one of those moments where the commentary just blows your mind. Rashi tells this incredible story. He says it wasn't a coincidence at all. It was planned, centuries in advance. According to tradition, Jacob actually foresaw this very moment. And so he planted acacia trees in Egypt with specific instructions for his kids to bring them along when they eventually left. How amazing is that? It takes a practical problem and turns it into this epic story of foresight and destiny.
And it's not just the wood. This level of detail is there for other materials too. That blue yarn, the techelet, Rashi explains it's dyed using the blood of a specific type of shellfish. And what about those mysterious tahash skins? Well, tradition says it was this unique, multicolored animal that existed only at that time for this one purpose, and then it was gone. The commentary just keeps filling in these incredible details, making this ancient list feel real.
Okay, let's zoom in now. We're going to focus on the absolute centerpiece of the whole sanctuary, the Ark of the Covenant. This wasn't just a fancy box. It was the entire reason for building everything else, and the instructions to build it, they are incredibly precise.
So the blueprint starts out simply enough. It says to use that special acacia wood we were just talking about. The dimensions are laid out perfectly, about 4 feet long, 2 feet wide, 2 feet high. A simple wooden box. But then comes the next instruction, and it's a real head-scratcher for any builder. The text says to cover this wooden box with pure gold. Okay, sounds good. But then it says to cover it on the outside
and the inside, seamlessly. So, how do you do that? How do you plate the inside of a box with gold? It seems impossible, right? But, once again, Rashi comes through with this absolutely brilliant explanation.
Here's what Rashi says the craftsman, a guy named Bezalel, did. He didn't try to wrap a single piece of wood in gold. No way. Instead, he made 3 boxes, like Russian nesting dolls. He made a big gold box first. Then, he made a slightly smaller wooden box and put it inside the gold one. And then he made an even smaller gold box and put it inside the wooden one. And just like that, you have a wooden box that is perfectly covered in gold, inside and out. Genius. And this is the thing. Every single detail here has a deeper meaning. For instance, there was this gold molding, kind of like a crown, that went around the top edge of the ark. Rashi explains that wasn't just to make it look nice. It was a symbol of the crown of the Torah. Why? Because the Torah, the stone tablets, was going to be kept inside that box. The design of the container had to reflect the majesty of what it was holding.
Here's another one of those little details that's actually huge. The poles for carrying the ark. The command says that once you slide them into the rings on the side, you can never take them out. And Rashi jumps in to clarify, that means forever. Not just when you're moving it, they had to stay in. This was a symbol that the ark and the Torah it held had to be ready to go at a moment's notice, always on the move with the people.
Okay, so that brings us to the big picture. We've talked about who built this, what they used, and how they did it. But the biggest question is, why? Was this incredibly detailed blueprint just for one tent, for one moment in time in the desert? Or was it meant to be something more permanent?
The text itself gives us a pretty big clue. It uses the word pattern. This isn't just a list of suggestions, It's a very specific, divine pattern that has to be followed down to the letter. Which leads to the next question. For how long?
And that's really the core question, isn't it? Was this whole thing just a temporary setup for people on the move, a kind of historical pop-up that was meant to be replaced later? Or was this pattern designed to last, to have a future beyond the desert?
Rashi's take on this is just profound. He zooms in on that last little phrase, "and so shall you make it." He explains that those words basically make the command timeless. It extends it to all future generations. This design became the eternal template. So if something got lost or broke, you had to remake it following this exact pattern. Even hundreds of years later, when the huge permanent temple was built, the most important items inside were still based on this original desert blueprint.
So when you step back, what we've really been doing is deconstructing a physical blueprint. It's a pattern of gold and wood and yarn. But remember where we started? The whole point was to create a home for a spiritual presence. And that leaves us with this one big, lingering question to think about. How can a perfectly followed physical pattern actually create a spiritual reality? That right there is the mystery at the very heart of this ancient design.